Julia, very good evening to you. Thank you for being with us. So, for our local audience, put these resignations in context.
Well, this is a significant moment because what it really does is mark the beginning of the transition of power, which of course is still 4 years away here in Russia. President Putin will have to step down at the end of this presidential term in 2024. But what's unclear is what will happen next, what he will do and who will replace him. And as of tonight, we're starting to get a clearer idea of what form that future of Russia will take. These resignations came, as you said, after President Putin announced a number of proposed constitutional changes that would involve giving more power to Parliament and the Prime Minister and placing restrictions on the next president of Russia. So any successor to President Putin would have a restriction on the number of terms that they could serve. They wouldn't be able to do what President Putin himself has done, which is to serve 2 presidential terms, step down, take over as Prime Minister, and then come back as president for another 2 terms, because that's really how long President Vladimir Putin has been around. He first came to power as president 20 years ago this year, and so we've started to see an idea of what might happen when he comes to the end of this last presidential term.
And as that idea begins to take shape then, Julia, is there any indication at this point of whether, once these changes have been effected, are they likely to give Vladimir Putin an opportunity to bear some sort of influence on the running of the Russian government beyond his time as president, because his term does end in 2024?
That's what it looks like. If he were to become prime minister, it would perhaps be a slightly reduced amount of power, but certainly would still have some influence over the president, like he did during those 4 years between 2008 and 2012, when President Putin became Prime Minister Putin, and Dmitry Medvedev, who has resigned today, he was president for 4 years. And so that is something that could be the next eventuality. Another alternative that's been proposed is that President Putin would take over the State Council or the Security Council, 2 bodies which don't have an enormous amount of influence at the moment, but these constitutional changes that the president is proposing would give them more power. So that's why observers here believe that this is the opportunity where President Putin is shaping the new government structure that would allow a figure other than the president to wield a great deal of influence over the decisions that get made in Russia.
And how have the changes of the past few hours been digested by the opposition in particular? Because there have been anti-Putin protests and accusations that he is rather anti-democratic by some.
That's right. The opposition has, of course, not been very happy about these changes, although they were expected to be proposed eventually. There have been many people speculating as to how and when these changes could be brought in. But the opposition, of course, is very critical of these moves. They say that President Putin is simply trying to consolidate his power for another further years to come. And that's after already 20 years of being the most important figure in this country. There are many people living in Russia who know no other leader. And President Putin is broadly very popular, not least among young people, but around Russians as a whole, because he did bring Russia out of a very chaotic period in the 1990s and has overseen enormous economic growth, improving the lives of many millions of Russians. And so they broadly do support him, despite a brief dip in his popularity over the last couple of years due to pension reforms and a crackdown on opposition last year. But of course, many people who are opposed to President Putin say that this is a very significant moment because it will certainly allow him to continue being in power for many years to come.
Julia Chapman, live for us in Russia tonight. Thank you.